All right, there we are. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to how to create mobile apps with React Native. So my name is Rap. I'll be your presenter today. And we're going to be talking about React Native. Just a little bit about myself, that I've been a developer for a long time, many, many years. Most of the time I spent has been on client-side development. So, and that really does include mobile, honestly. So I'm talking about, I've done a lot of work on development and web applications, and I've done a lot of work on mobile applications. So also I spend about half my time doing presentations like this, training and things like that. So anyway, welcome. Glad that you all are here. In the next hour, we're going to talk about creating mobile apps with React Native. So I thought as we were thinking about what kinds of things that you would want to see, I kind of settled on these. So we're really going to talk about three things. First of all, I'm going to define React Native. For anybody that is maybe not quite familiar with it, we'll get a high-level introduction, and I'll talk about some of the characteristics of React Native, how it does its thing, what are the philosophies, what are some of the architecture underneath, to give you an idea of whether it would be something that would fit the paradigms that you need. Then we're going to get a little bit technical, and I'm actually going to write some code. So we'll answer the question, how do you create an app? You'll see me write some code. We're going to create an app that could be deployed to both iOS and Android. Very simple app because we have only got an hour, but we'll do that together. Then third, we're going to come back and wrap it up with, is React Native right for you? And in that, we're going to look at some case studies of organizations who have picked up React Native and how it worked for them. When we look at those stories, we're going to figure out what are the characteristics that would make it a good choice for some organizations and maybe a bad choice for other organizations. All right? So let us begin. Oh yeah, if you have questions, please feel free to put those either in the chat or the questions tool. And or even if you're able to unmute and you just want to ask a question, I'm fine with you asking questions in the middle too. At the end, I'll actually ask for any questions and see if anybody's got any of those. So let's make this interactive if you're able. All right. So let's start with the first thing, and that is, what even is this React Native thing? So let me paint the picture by telling a story. Let's pretend like you're the CEO of a small business. And let's pretend like you realize that as this small business is growing, that in order to be, I don't know, to be relevant, you really need to have a web application. So everybody's got to have a web app these days, right? So if you have a web application, how do you get that written? If you're the owner of a small business, how do you do that? Can't do it yourself, so you've got to hire a web developer. All right, well, that's great, but web developers are kind of expensive. You bite the bullet, you hire that web developer anyway, and then you get this feedback. The customers are saying to you, hey, we love that your web app, it was really great, but I wish it were in the App Store. Now, let me tell you guys a quick war story, because this actually happened to a group that I was working with. We created a web application thinking that we could create a progressive web application, a progressive web app that would run on devices as well as on a web, on laptops and things like that. And we were thinking that if we wrote this one app, that it could be used anywhere and we would only have to have the one code base. So we made our app responsive so it looked good on any screen and the whole nine. I mean, it was a true progressive web app. It had offline storage, the whole nine. But the feedback that we got from our users was this. When we would go to trade shows and show them this app, you know, the web app, they would say, oh, this looks fantastic. I cannot wait to use this. I'm definitely going to buy it. I can't find you in the App Store, though. And we would go, well, we're not on the App Store. It's not a mobile app. It's a web app. And they were very confused by this. So it looks like Apple and Google have trained the world to go and look on the App Store, on their app stores, for applications, not on the web. So sometimes you have to have an app in the App Store. And if your business gets big enough to do that, well, you'd then say, okay, well, how do I get into the App Store? thinking that maybe I can get my web app and put it in the App Store. That clearly cannot happen. You can't put a web application in the App Store. If you want to get in the Apple AppStore, then you have to hire an iOS developer who knows Swift or Objective-C and knows how to develop on iOS. And by the way, these developers are not cheap because it's a special skill set that they have to have, and it's relatively rare. It's becoming more common, but still, it's relatively rare. You can't share between iOS and the web. It's a different type of person. Okay, awesome. So you get your app out in the App Store, and then the customers, of course, they come back and they say, hey, wait a minute, most of us have Android devices. We aren't finding you in the Google Play Store. Why do you only have an iOS app? Well, wait a second. iOS, some of you would say this. In fact, my family would say this. Dad, everybody's got an iOS. Everybody's got an iPhone. We don't need Android. We just have and the fact is that about 65% of the mobile devices in the United States are Apple. So that's not that bad. But in turn, it turns out that if you go worldwide, that most of the world uses Android devices. In fact, outside of the US, it's 85% Android and only 15% iOS. So you really can't ignore either side. You really have to have something both places. Therefore, well, all right, so I guess I have to put something in the Google Play Store. And you go to your iOS developer and you say, can you give me an Android app? And of course, they say no. Again, it's a different skill set. You have to know a different set of things. So you have to hire now a third developer who now knows Java or Kotlin, and they'd have to know how to develop for Android. So you're now stuck as a small business person having to hire 3 people to essentially recreate the same thing on all 3 of those locations. So, gosh, if only there were some way that we wouldn't have to hire 3 different people to create this same app 3 different times. And oh, by the way, let me share this too, that there is no sharing between them. None of the iOS code can be used for Android, and it can't be used for the web. None of these things, none of them share. They all have to be unique. So, if there were only some place where we could go, and there you go. That's what React Native does for you. At least that's the promise of React Native. We'll see how well it fulfills that promise in a little while. The idea behind React Native is this, that you can, having one code base, be able to code for iOS and Android. So you write the code one time, and it works in both places. I don't know, the documentation will say this, that you can create apps for iOS and Android. In fact, this is the reason that most of us would ever go to React Native, is because we want to write something that's cross-platform. It's for both platforms, iOS and Android. But reading further, you would find out that you can actually write with one code base also for the web and for Windows and for Linux and for MacBooks, and for Android TV and Apple TV. And it's a true story. All of these things are available, but that's the theory. Let me tell you reality. In reality, I know of no organizations that are doing it for more than 2 platforms. Every organization, every release in the wild that I've heard of is actually only doing it for iOS and Android. And yes, granted, I'm sure that there are some out there who have been compiling it down for the web also, but the experience on the web, from what I've seen, is just miserable. So we really kind of are not needing to focus. I guess what I'm trying to do here is to say that when you read that you can write using one code base, have some application for all of these different things, that promise has really not been fulfilled. It really ends up being effectively only iOS and Android. Now, the beauty of these apps, when you create them, is that they're not like faked apps. There's other frameworks that help you to create apps for iOS and Android, things like Cordova or Ionic, Apache Cordova and Ionic. These things, they're great, but they are hosted inside of a web view. So with those, the development is very easy. all you're ever doing is writing in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that's a skill set that's very valuable, but it's also very common. There's lots of web developers out there. They just have to add on a little bit in knowing that they have to put a wrapper around it in order for it to be used on an iOS or Android device. Also, what we found is that the stores are becoming more picky about those kinds of apps, that they want the app to be something more than just hosted in a web view. So they really are leaning toward native apps. And the beauty of React Native is that it creates an actual app, and actually it compiles down to an IPA or an APK, both of which can be deployed to the stores. So they are actual native apps. Once you get one of those, it's indistinguishable. You can't tell that it came from something other than Swift or Objective-C or Kotlin or Java. So it's really, really nice. Now, you can develop for both of these environments, and yet you don't even need a Mac. Now, the only place that you can compile to create an IPA file is on a Mac. You have to have Xcode installed, and so you have to have a Mac. But so if you want to create that final IPA, you have to have a Mac to do that. But in the meantime, you really don't have to, because if you're just coding, if you're doing the development process, you can create an executable on a Windows machine. In fact, week before last, I was working with a client that who they have like 20 developers, maybe something in that range, but they're a Windows shop. Everybody has Windows machines, and they're using React Native. So what they did was they just bought a couple of Macs, kind of put them as common machines, and everybody has access to those. And so everybody develops on their Windows machines for iOS, and when they're ready to compile, they'll go over to that Mac virtually. They'll go over to one of those two Macs to do their compilation. So you really don't even need a Mac in order to do this. So this is one of the reasons that companies are finding this very attractive, is that it really does open up the possibilities of where you can write for iOS. And bonus, you get Android as well. Okay? So when you write this, at some point you're going to want to compile. And when you compile, what comes out of the compilation is an IPA file or an APK file that can then be submitted directly to the Google Play Store or the Apple AppStore. Now, we're not saying here that it's anything magic, it's anything extra. You still have to go through the typical process. It doesn't make the getting it into the store any easier. That part is really tough. It really is very, very sticky. You have to register, and you have to fill in a lot of metadata in order to deploy. That stuff still needs to happen. But the answer is you don't have to develop this code twice, once for iOS and once for Android. The same code base will compile down to an IPA or an APK. So it's really very nice. Now, when you create your applications, the other cool thing about this is that the elements will render natively when possible. Now, here's what I mean by this. Looking at this example code you're seeing here in my screen share, is you've got a couple of buttons and a box with content in it. On the left, you have how it would look on Android, and on the right is you see how it would look on iOS. The typical Android look and feel is Google Material Design. So this is where things will have shadows. They look like they're coming out of the page to you, right? They're popped off of the page, so there's an elevation to them. They don't usually have borders around them, but they do have that shadow behind it. And also on the buttons, the text on the buttons are all uppercased, so it's like shout case rather than the normal sentence case. But on iOS, on the other hand, they like to have rounded corners and borders, and everything's flat. So with React Native, you can write code one time and have it appear like an iOS thing on iOS, and have it appear as a native Android thing on Android. No extra code needed. In fact, it would just look something like this. Okay, so this is a typical example here of how you would create a button, a simple button in iOS or Android. Now, it turns out that when you write this, the reason why is because even though we write like this third thing, it actually renders a UI button on iOS, and an Android.widget.button on Android, Android.widget button on Android, and it uses the underlying UI button on iOS. So this is why it's displayed natively. Now there's another framework out there. Hang on a second. Grab this book behind me. There's another framework out there called Flutter, and I've written a book on Flutter, beginning app development with Flutter. So feel free to go. I'm not selling books here, but feel free to go pick up a copy of that. So I know Flutter fairly well too, and this is one advantage that React Native has over Flutter. The advantage is that with Flutter, when you create a button, it's going to look exactly the same on iOS as it will with Android, and you choose at that point. And of course, in Flutter, you can write code that says, if I'm on iOS, make it look this way. If I'm on Android, make it look that way. But with React Native, you don't have to do that. With React Native, it comes kind of right out of the box. Okay? So once again, this is not always possible, but where it's possible, it's really nice to have that byproduct if you care about the native look and feel. All right, so at this point, we're reaching a nice segue point because we've been talking about what is React Native, and yet the very last thing we looked at was some code. So let's take this as a segue into how you would create an app itself. So that'll be the second part, is what are you as a developer, or what are your developers going to be up against when they're creating these apps? So let's talk about that. Hang on a second. I'm just going to check in the questions here. Okay. Okay, got it. That question was answered. All right, good. Just real quickly, somebody put in, Dan put in a question. Can you explain the difference between React Native and React JS? I sure can. They are completely different things. In fact, that's really where we were going next, so that's perfect. Check this out. Watch this. In React Native, you're going to be using components, and React Native provides 40 different components for you to use. Now, it's not exactly 40, but it's on the order of 40 because they add to, and believe it or not, remove components too, but it's on the order of 40 components. 40 different building blocks, if you will, that you can work with to create your applications. On the other hand, the web provides about 250 HTML tags. So you can see here that you're much more limited with React Native in what I can put on the page. Now, Dan, to your question, there are a lot of people out there, developers, managers, decision makers, architects, that kind of get excited about React Native at first because they go, oh, sweet, I can create an application with React on the web, and then I just recompile it or copy paste or something like that, and now it suddenly works on mobile. And unfortunately, that is not the case. So the answer to your question, what's the difference between React Native and React JS, is this, that React JS is always and only for the web. React Native is always and only for iOS and Android. So there's no overlapping between the two. Okay, now, just in the interest of full disclosure, I will tell you that Facebook is working very, very hard on creating a version of the web version of it that will actually run on the web. But it's not going to involve things like React, like divs and paragraphs and images and things like that. It's actually going to run in a canvas. So they're kind of cheating. Hey, if the cheating works, that's great. But that'll be nice if they can get that working. As of right now, it does work, and you can compile down to a web version. But that web version it's limited. I'll just put it that way. It's limited. There are certain features that you can do on a phone that you can't do on the web. So if you want to do both at the same time, web and mobile, then you have to kind of limit the mobile application, because the web can't do everything that the mobile can. All right. So we cannot share code between them because they're completely different. Your React Native components are one thing, and your HTML components are something different. None of your HTML will work in React Native. None of your React Native code will work on the web in React JS. So there is no sharing between them. I just got to dispel that myth. Now, again, in the interest of full disclosure, it is quite possible that if you have some JavaScript that works on the web, and it has nothing to do with the presentation, you might be able to reuse that JavaScript code in React Native. So if it's purely business logic, has nothing to do with showing anything to the user or interacting with the user interface, then that might be shareable between the two. Let me also warn you there that when I've tried that, it is doable. I've done it, but it's you have to do it really carefully, and you have to end up linking files or creating separate libraries. So it's dicey at best. So what we found is that in most situations, there's not enough of that kind of code that needs to be shared, and so it's usually duplicated between the two. Sorry. But taking a look at these things, you've got, even though there is no sharing between them, there's a lot of paradigms that React Native and the web do share. For instance, it is sort of a tag-based language. Like HTML has got these tags like divs and paragraphs and images and so forth. React Native has tags as well. They're just completely different. On the web, you might have a div, and a div, as you know, on the web is just a generic container. It can contain anything in there. It can contain other text or images. It's just used for grouping things together, styling them together, and laying out the page. Well, in React Native, they have the same concept. It's just called a view. So a view in React Native is very much like a div in the web. And in the web, you've got a paragraph tag, which is used exclusively for holding text. Same deal in React Native. You have a text for holding text. In HTML, you have an IMG. In React Native, you have an IMAGE. So they're not exactly the same, but they're not all that different. And there's a whole lot of thought process that you have working in the web that can translate over to React Native. Now, I do have to warn you, though. The attributes that are part of it are absolutely different between the two. So it's not like a one-to-one comparison. Even when you have analogous elements like you're seeing here, they're still, it's a whole new thing. It's a whole new learning curve. These components, they fall into several categories. You can see that there's, like I said, there's about 40 different components in React Native, and they fall in these categories. These categories, things like layout controls, so therefore laying out the page. And, you know, we don't have pages on devices, but you do have a screen. So these would be for laying out the screen. And then you've got controls that contain values, single value controls, list type controls, and you've got things that turn other things into a button, that's like with an on-click event and so forth. So it turns out that these things are, because of their analogies to the web, they're very similar, but again, they are different. So while there's a whole lot of learning, that it makes the learning curve a bit more shallow if you've had some HTML experience, it doesn't eliminate it altogether. We'll see an example in a little while. Now, when you're working with React Native, it's just like working with React because it's a componentized model and a reactive model. When I say componentized, what I'm trying to communicate there is that you and I are going to build small components, these small components. And these small components will be combined with other small components to form larger components. Those larger components will be combined with other components to form even larger components, and you compose and compose and compose until you get to the very top, and now you have a full-blown app. The thing that developers like about this model is that it allows us to create units that are much smaller, easier to maintain, easier to write in the first place, but more importantly, when other developers see them, they're abstract because they're small, so it's very easy to maintain. And it's a reactive model. What this means is that the philosophy of React and React Native is that I get some data and I let the code decide how to draw that. It will change based upon the changing of the data. So you don't have to write a whole lot of wiring up code to say, when the user clicks the button, I go and grab this value and I do this processing to it, and then I make sure it shows here. That's imperative coding. With a reactive model, you just connect the presentation to the data, and when the data changes, the presentation knows to redraw itself. Developers love these two models because it's just fun for developers because it allows us to create these worlds where we write a little bit of code and get a lot of results. So it's much faster for development, And even better, it's much better for maintenance in the long term. Now, looking at these things here, if you're a React developer, you might say, well, that's exactly how React works, and that's not a coincidence. It turns out that React Native actually uses React. So here is a typical, albeit very, very simple component. You can see here, looking at this, it's just plain text. Notice that it's a .js extension. It's JavaScript. And you can see that the very first thing it does is it imports React. So React Native uses React. Then you'll notice that the next step there is we're importing a couple of features, a view and a text from React Native. That's from a few pages ago. You remember where I showed you that a view is like a div and a text is like a paragraph? So inside of our React Native components, we would treat the view just like a div. It's grouping something together. And then the text is just got text inside of it. Okay, so this is very simple. Hello world. You got to write a hello world at first, right? But anyway, we would take this component, this myComponent.js, and we would use it inside of something else like app.js at the very top. Now, at this point, we do composition just like we would do with React Native. I'm sorry, just like we would do with React. Now, some of you out there know React already, and you're looking at this and going, dude, this is a piece of cake. You immediately understand this. All you're doing so far is you're just translating from the HTML tags into other React Native components. But it even uses props, and it even uses composition and state, just like in React. So if you already know React, you have a huge step up in terms of React Native. If you don't know React, then you're going to have more of a learning curve, because not only do you have to know to learn React, but you also have to know how to apply it in React Native. If you know JavaScript, you also have a huge leg up, because React Native is not that tough to pick up. I'm sorry, React is not that tough to pick up if you know JavaScript. And bonus, if all of this stuff is written in JavaScript. So that's a really nice thing. Flutter, by the way, Flutter is written in Dart, or you and I as developers, we have to use the Dart language in order to use it. And Dart's a fine language, it's great, but there's many, many of us that don't want to have to learn yet another language. So it's really nice that React Native uses JavaScript. It's one of the many advantages. All right, so with that said, here's some example code. Why don't we go off and let's write a quick application. Okay, so you're seeing here, please, Alex, let me know if people can't see my screen, but what you should be seeing here is a couple of simulators. I've got an Android simulator on the left and an iOS simulator on the right. I'm going to create an application that will run on both of these. So first of all, I'm going to create a new folder just on my desktop. Let's just call it webinar demo or something like that. And I'm going to drag it into Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is just the typical IDE, the development tool that most developers find themselves using for React Native and React for that matter. I'm going to open up a terminal, because in order to initialize our application, we're going to need to, there you go. We're going to need to start it up with the expo command. Okay, now expo is an additional tool. It's part of the React Native ecosystem. And expo, I'll just go ahead and get this started. Init, let's call it people list, why not? And I'm going to specify that I want to use NPM. I also have Yarn installed, and I love Yarn, but I'm just going to specify NPM for now just to make it a little simpler. So now it's asking me what kind of template I want to create, and I'm going to tell it I want a blank managed template. Okay, this is going to take a minute to download, because it's actually going out to the internet and pulling down a bunch of things. So this may chew up some of my bandwidth also, since we're doing this broadcasting. But while we're waiting for this to install, I'll read another question. What tool do you use to run emulators? Okay, great question. The Android emulator can be done with a couple of different tools. There's one called Genymotion, and that one works great, but it's not my favorite. My favorite is through Android Studio. So in Android Studio, there is a tool called the Android Virtual Device Manager, AVD Manager, Android Virtual Device Manager. And inside there, that's what I use for my Android emulators. The iOS emulator is really technically called a simulator because it's simulating an iOS device, and that's done through Xcode. That's the only one that I know of. Oh, and by the way, I'm really glad you mentioned that. That was Dimitri. Thank you, Dimitri, for the question. The reason that I develop on a Mac is because you can't run an iOS simulator on a Windows machine. So we can't really debug in an iOS simulator unless you're actually on a Mac. Okay, so it looks like our project has been created. I'm going to do just what they're suggesting right here. CD into people list, and then I'm going to go npm run start. So I will CD to people list, and then I'm going to go npm run start. Now, what this does is very much like what it does in React, is it compiles the application. It actually starts it up in a manager, managing the process, and then it pushes it out to the device. So you can see here, it came up with, on the terminal, came up with this big QR code. And I can actually, in fact, you could actually right now, if you had your mobile phone and you have a client called the Expo client, you could take your phone and take a picture of my screen, and you could be running this application on your device. Okay, so it's pretty cool. Okay, but nevertheless, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is run it in these emulators. And I can right here, I can hit an A to run it in Android, which I'll do, ready, set, A. And it's going to open it, hopefully, it'll open it up on the Android emulator. And then when that's finished, I'm going to go ahead and open it up in iOS too. Okay, and it's compiling. It's tough to see, but if you look right down there, it says, I'm building my JavaScript bundle. And you can see it's compiling here as well. And after it compiles, it'll push that out to the client. All right, I'll just see if there's any other questions. Okay, looks like those are good. All right, yeah, the first compile does take a minute, so be patient. The first compile does take a minute, but after that, there is a thing called fast refresh built into these emulators. Not emulators, well, sort of. Anyway, fast refresh allows it to refresh almost instantly when you make a change. So we'll see that in a moment too. Okay, almost finished there. And when it's finished, it will let us know on screen that it's done. There it goes. There, finally. All right, so I know this is not very exciting, but you can see here it says, open up app.js to start working on your app, which is true because right over here in people list, we have a file called app.js, which is the source code for our main app. And you can see here again, looks just like React. And right there, here is the text. That's the reason we're seeing that, because there's this text here that says open up app.js to start working on your app. Now, at the same time, let me run right here and go I'm going to hit an I, and that's going to open it up in iOS. Okay, so I'm not going to make you wait while we do this compile. You'll just take my word for it. And maybe this one will go faster. Yeah, it is going faster already. But you can see over here in the source code that, well, it provides this basic application for us. And you can see that we have here simply a view with a text and a styling of the status bar, and then a view. Okay, that view is like the div. It's just grouping these things together for styling purposes. Okay, so I can adjust the styles. I won't do it while it's compiling, but I could adjust the styles and make changes, change the background color and so forth. And while we're here, let's just take a look at the styles. Looking at these things, you can see that it's very, very much like CSS. So it is not CSS, but they share some of the same ideas as CSS and some of the same keywords as CSS. In fact, if you know CSS for the web, then you pretty much well know React Native styling. There's a lot of overlap there too. Now, looking at the iOS device, you can see it says open up app.js to start working on your app. So how about this? Let's try this. I'm going to change this to, you got to do a hello world, right? So I'm going to do a hello world. Okay, now watch this. Keep your eye on the emulators. I'm going to hit save, Command S to save, and notice, do you see how fast that was? That's fast refresh. So I made the change, and we immediately saw that in both of the emulators, iOS and Android. All right, so let me expand this example a little bit. There is a website out there, folks. Feel free to go and visit it. It's called randomuser.me. Randomuser.me provides an API which provides realistic looking but fake data about users. So let's go and read some data from there, and let's provide a list of persons. So I'm going to go here. I'm coding fast, but you can go back and rewatch the recording and slow it down if you'd like to follow along. In people list, in my project, I'm going to create a new file. Let's call it people.js. And in here, since it's a React component, I'm going to import React from React. Then, because it's a React Native component, I'm also probably going to need some things inside of here, like text or whatever. So I'm going to import text and maybe a view. We'll see what we need from React Native. Then I'm going to create a component. So I'll export const people, and I'm going to make that a component that simply returns some JSX. And again, if you know React, you know what JSX is. If you don't, then you have to learn React first. But it's going to return back some JSX, which may be, I don't know. How about, well, we'll wrap it in a view first off, and then we're going to get a list of people. So let me receive in a list of people from its parent. This is passing a value in from the host down into this component through a prop called people. This is like the input values in a function. So in here, I'm going to loop through the people. People.map person, yeah. And for each person, why not? Let's have another subcomponent called a person. Yeah, I like it. Okay? That means we're going to have to create another component and import it. So in people list, I'm going to go here and create a person.js. And once again, I need the same structure. In fact, I'm going to kind of cheat and copy it from here, paste it into person. So now we have a component called person, but we're not going to receive in people. We're just going to receive in a single person. And how about in our view, let's put in a text. And inside that text, let's read the person dot name dot first. And let's put their last name too, person dot name dot last. Now, the only reason I know what these variables are called is because I've worked with the randomuser.api API. Randomuser.me. Randomuser.me is where you'd find that. Please feel free to go and take a look at those. Okay, this looks good. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to people.js. And in here, I need to import person from /person, because that was the other component that I created, and this one uses that other one, right? So it uses it right here. Therefore, I have to import it. And furthermore, I wrote that thing to expect me to pass in a person. So I'll say person equal person. Cool. Now, back in app.js, remember, in app.js, it's using the person component. So therefore, I have to import person into app.js. I'll go up here to the top, and I will import person from /person. Okay. Now I'm going to pause for just a second, folks, because you remember on that one slide where I had the tree view, I had components inside components inside components. That's what we're doing here. The person component is inside of people. And people, there's multiple persons inside of people. And person is inside of app.js. So we could do other things in app.js besides display people, and that would be separate from this. So person can specialize on being a person. People can specialize on drawing a bunch of people. Okay, specialization is what allows this paradigm to work so well. All right, so rather than saying hello world, how's about let's go. I'm going to draw an instance of person up there, and let's pass in, oh, sorry, people. Let me pass in people, and we're going to pass in a people object, an array of people, into that component. Well, clearly, if I'm going to pass in a bunch of people, I have to have set this variable. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of magic here, folks, because React kind of requires this. But the way that you read something from elsewhere asynchronously is we have to use a hook called useEffect, a feature called useEffect. And if we're going to set the state, we have to use a feature called useState. These are called React hooks. And again, you React developers know what I'm talking about. But if you're not a React developer, you have to kind of learn React before you can learn React Native. Okay, so let me bring those in from React first. I'm going to go React, and then what did I say? Use state and use effect. Okay, in here, I'm going to create a state. So I'm going to go const people and set people. Set that equal to use state. And let's pass in an empty array to initialize it. So it's initially going to start out as an empty array. In fact, at this point, unless I miss my guess, we should be able to compile, and it should work. Oh, okay. Can't find variable people. So it looks like I may have messed up my import somehow. Okay, when you see this red thing, this means that there's an error. This is called the log box, and log box is letting me know there's an error somewhere. So it doesn't know what people is. Oh, duh, I imported person, not people. We don't need person at app, we need people. I'm going to hit save. There you go. Okay, good. My error's gone. We're seeing now hello world, and then underneath that, you can't see it because it's empty, but there is a list of people underneath there. It's an empty array. Okay, so now let's go and fetch the data. I'm going to go and create a use state here. Now, folks, I'm sorry, use effect. Folks, again, you wouldn't be expected to understand this unless you really already were well familiar with React. But in React, the way that you run something asynchronously is you put it inside of a use effect one way or another. Okay, so in this use effect, we're going to go, let's see, we want to fetch some data, and we want to get that from https://randomuser.me/API, I believe. And let's go and grab 10 people to start with. When that fetch finishes, then I want to take the response and serialize it to JSON. Okay, and then What's inside of there? Oh, what's inside of there is actually a sub-object called results. So I'm going to go res.results. And if I remember right from using it in the past, that should be all of our people. So then I've got a bunch of people. Therefore, I can set people and pass in people. And I think what that's going to do, folks, is it's going to populate this variable with all the people we get back from the service. Then it's going to refresh this page. It's going to redraw. That's the reactive portion I mentioned before. All I do is I set the data, and it knows I'm supposed to redraw. Okay? And then we should see them. Now, hang on a second. I'm going to put in a catch here just to be safe in case there's an error. Let's make sure that that error is displayed. So I will console.error, and I'll say problem fetching, and I'll print the error in case we need that, but hopefully we won't have any. Okay, I hit save. They refresh. Oh man, oh, look at this. Oops, I forgot something over here. I made one error right here. I told it to refresh and then keep refreshing. I got us in an endless loop on Android. So let me hit save there. Okay, there we go. Now it looks like on Android, we made 2 requests to the server, one from our Android running application and one from our iOS running application. The iOS one failed. The one on Android worked okay. So let me just try and refresh it over here, and let's see what happens. Command D, yes. Reload it. This will recompile and everything. Oh, it failed again. All right, I'm not convinced this is my code. I think that this is just intermittent service from the server. Okay, so we'll move on. We'll look at Android for a second, and then we'll come back and do some more iOS. But now that we have this list of people, we could go into person, and in person we can make this thing a bit more robust. So let's go. We've got their name. Let's see if we can get a picture. So I'm going to go image. Let's see if I can remember this. Source equal, and in this image, we're going to go, let's see, source equal, and I believe it is URI colon, and I believe that is person.picture.large. Okay? Put that in an object. Oh, yeah, duh. It says I can't find image. I don't know what an image is. So remember, we have to import these things from React Native. So up here, I've got to go image. Okay, let me hit save again. Okay, this time Android had a problem fetching. iOS did not. We should be seeing a bunch of pictures here, but we're not. Actually, I'm concerned about, you know what? I'm concerned that iOS is not refreshing at all. So I'm going to kill our server, and I'm going to rerun it. Sometimes that needs to happen. You have to refresh the application; they get stale in the emulators. So let me try I for iOS. Come on, iOS. Not so much? Okay. I'm actually going to kill it. Hold on. Kill the application. Let's try this again. I for iOS. And what the heck, I'll kill it on Android too while we're here. All right, fair enough. Again, problems fetching. That's the server. Wouldn't you know it, when I need to do a demonstration, the server goes wonky. I'll tell you what, I'm going to put some styling. Put some styling on this. Yeah, in this person while we're waiting. Oh, there you go. There's some people. Image. And let's go height, colon, 100. Width, colon, 100. Okay, that's all right. Nothing? Oh, I'm not using the style. That's why. So I have to apply a style. You have to apply. I defined the style. I just never applied it. Hit save. There we go. Look at that. There's some people in their pictures. It's not too shabby. Right? And in people.js here, I'm going to go to people.js. And in people.js, they're inside of that thing. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to try a trick here. Let me go put a style sheet here. Style sheet, const styles equal style sheet.create. And let's say I'll create a style called a wrapper style. You can kind of think of these styles. They feel sort of like classes in regular CSS. And let's go flex direction row. Styles.wrapper. Okay, I'm going to hit save one more time. There, look at that. So now they're going across. And if I put a little wrapping in them, flex wrap. So those of you who are paying attention, you're noticing here that there's a lot of similarities because some of you know about Flexbox in CSS, and you're looking at that going, hey, this looks really familiar. Okay, so I can now put, let's see, in between each of these persons, I can grab a style here, wrapper. I'm going to put some padding. You'll see where I'm going in just a second. Wrapper. And let's go padding, colon 10. Okay, good. They're spread out a little bit now. All right, and just for grins, let's go and grab, instead of 10, let's grab 30. I don't know. There you go. Hey, iOS woke up. So now you can see we're getting a whole bunch of people with lots of pictures. And I could make them scrollable, and I can put a click event on each person, so you click on their face, and maybe it selects them or zooms in, or maybe make them editable, whatever. So all kinds of places that we could go with this. Okay. All right. So here's what I'm going to plan to do, folks. I'm gonna sort of wrap this up. Let's go back and remember that we're talking about three things. Right now, we're looking at how you create an app. And I think we've seen that. But remember, we had a third topic. And how do I decide if React Native is the right thing for you? So let's talk about that. More than happy to come back and answer any questions that you have after that, or even we can try stuff. If you want me to try something, give you a demonstration on the app that I've built, I'm happy to do that. All right, so last topic. Is React Native right for you? Now, for your organization, how do you decide? And I had thought originally about coming in and just giving you a bunch of my opinions, telling you what I thought, but you know what? You might think that they're just my opinions and discount them. So I think it's probably worth our time to let's see what others had to say. Let's go and take a look at 3 different companies, 3 different organizations that have used React Native, got deep into React Native, and what they thought worked well and what didn't. And using those, we can kind of back out what would be useful for your group. So there are 3 organizations that are like they're buzzing right now. Their stories about React Native have gone viral, and what you're seeing here are the logos for those companies. Please notice, look underneath the logos. I've got some bit shortened links for you. These are links to some really well-written, very long articles, very detailed articles about what went well for these organizations and maybe what didn't go well. So I'm going to summarize them here for you now. The first of these 3 stories, the first of these 3 groups is Udacity, udacity.com. Now, what Udacity found out in their article, I'm just reading from their article, is they found that it was very easy to get up and running very quickly with React Native, much, much quicker than iOS and Android, even individually. So it's faster. Second, if you have developers, what worked really well for them was they had developers who already knew React, and they found the learning curve to be very simple. Now, what they decided was for the places where iOS and Android looked the same, React Native was a very good choice. But unfortunately, when you wanted a truly native experience, that part didn't work for them. So, for instance, the navigation is different between iOS and Android. It's not just a matter of rounded corners and shadows. There's that, but there's also the navigation experience. Because in navigation, you know, the Androids, they always at the bottom, they have the back button, they have the navigation bar thing at the bottom there. Well, you don't have that in iOS. And so they needed to provide a back button in iOS, and that looked weird on Android, and so they had to make those 2 things separate. The navigation was different enough that they couldn't reuse that code base. They also found that when they had to do those kind of device-specific specifications, it was a lot of work. And lastly, their Android team didn't like using React Native, partially because React Native, when they released changes, some of them were breaking changes. So folks, this happens fairly common. When you upgrade React Native, certain things break. That's not good. So let's take a look at the second one. The second story is from Airbnb. Now, Airbnb was as into React Native as any organization. They were in full bore. Airbnb, they created libraries, posted them as open source for React Native, and many of my friends are using their things. It's a very, very common thing to end up using a library for React Native that was originally created by Airbnb, so they were all in. And they love the community support. What they found out as they wrote that the experience writing in JavaScript and React was way better than the experience writing in Kotlin or Swift, that the developers really enjoyed that. They loved the reactive aspect of writing in React Native. But what they had a problem with were things like dynamic typing. So JavaScript is just loosey. It was too dynamic for them. But remember that can be fixed with TypeScript. So if one takeaway from this would be that if you're using React Native, you might consider using React Native with TypeScript, and it works great. It's a seamless integration. So maybe even start with TypeScript. Airbnb's hope in this was that they would go into it. They had 2 code bases, iOS and Android. They were hoping that they would get into this and find that they only had to have 1 code base. But in reality, because they had so much things that were unique, they didn't have not 2, but 3 now. So their problems didn't get better. They actually got worse. They had iOS code, Android code, and then React Native code. Debugging was a lot harder. Accessibility was not as mature on React Native, and Airbnb, they wanted people who were visually challenged to be able to use their app. So React Native didn't work for them, and they eventually pulled out. As deep as they were into the ecosystem, the community, they still pulled out, and they're no longer using React Native. The third story, though, has got a much happier ending, and that's Shopify. Shopify provides applications for retail stores. And what they said, and this is a direct quote, after years of native mobile development, we've decided to go full steam ahead, building all of our new mobile apps using React Native. So they tried it out, they piloted it, they used it, and it's been great for them. So what their philosophy was that they wanted to have deep specialization. So they want their developers to be able to have fewer technologies so that they can focus on those technologies and know them more. React Native is just one versus iOS and Android. Now you've got multiples. So you can know React Native much better than you can know both iOS and Android. Their people knew React.js very, very well, so they had a big head start on it. And what they found was for their application, they were able to share about 95% of their code between the two. So it was very successful for them. There just wasn't a whole lot of native iOS development, native Android development that they were able to do almost everything with React Native. Only 5% was different between them. Now that they finished off the article by saying that they still are going to have plenty of native code, plenty of native developers. It's just that their new applications are being developed in React Native. Their old ones are staying the way that they are. So I think that putting these things together, when you create an amalgam of their experiences, we have several really good takeaways. First of all, should you use React Native? Is it good for you? Who is it good for? Should you use it? Well, maybe. Maybe if you find yourself and you need an iOS and an Android app to appear in the stores, and your team already knows JavaScript, then this might be a really good choice for you. Bonus points if they also know React. And lastly, you value speed over qualities. And what we're talking about here is speed of development. Therefore, if you want to get up and running quickly and you want your people to be able to develop fast, you're not one of these people who go, look, it has to look like iOS on iOS. It has to look like Android on Android. If it has to behave, I mean, and frankly, I'm the kind of person, I don't really even care. When I see an app, if I know how to use it, that's awesome. Don't care if it looks like iOS or Android. So this would work for me as a customer of a company that made this app. But on the other hand, what we've learned from these organizations, that if your app is complex, like a game, or it does a lot of deep things that are out of the box of the typical 40 or so React Native components that are provided for you, you have to go and get specialty components, and those are often native specific, iOS or Android specific. At the same time, what we learned from Shopify is that if you already have iOS devs and Android devs, don't change them. Don't make them go to React Native. But if you're starting something new, you don't have developers, or your developers are already conversant in JavaScript, then that would be much easier than having them learn iOS and Android. And if your apps don't have to be wildly different on the different platforms, then React Native would be good. But if they are different, then React Native is not a great choice. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you all for attending. We've reached our hour time. I'm going to hang out. I'm going to shut down the broadcast, shut down the recording. But if anybody wants to hang around and ask questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. In the meantime, thank you very much. And yeah, thanks for attending. We will see you soon. Let me close off with this. There we go. So I'll put that up. Thank you all. Have a great day. Great rest of the day. Thank you. I got to thank you. Thanks.
Just a question.
Yes, of course.
There is applications that are programmed as Java for laptop and for mobile. What is the difference between them?
Okay, so a Java application, you're talking about a Java application that's on like a Windows machine or something like that?
There is Java programs for mobile, and
yes.
there is some for Windows. What is the difference?
Well, the difference is that they are compiled for different platforms. Usually when you're coding in Java for a mobile device, it's for Android only. Yeah, there is no developing for iOS with Java. But you can you're absolutely right. You can write in Java for mobile, and you can write in Java for, a laptop or something like that. It's just they're compiled down to different targets. They'd use different libraries, and there's really not a whole lot of sharing between those two. Did that help at all?
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thanks.
Can I have a question, please? Ask a question.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Expo, but I remember back in the times you could use create React Native, so you
Yep.
didn't need Expo back in the time. Is
Okay.
that still an option?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. There's really two ways to start your React Native application. One is it's Expo init, and the other is called React-Native init. React-Native init. Create React Native app has gone away. That's been deprecated, but React Native init does work. If you started out as an Expo app, then it's easier to get started. There's just less friction. And then later on, you can eject if you need to. You can eject out of Expo. So even Facebook is recommending that you start out as an Expo app. And then if you have to, if you're forced to eject from Expo, you can. But the other option that you're thinking of, it's been changed a little bit, but it's still the same concept, is you don't have to go through Expo if you don't want to. Is that cool?
Yes. So from Expo, I still can create all the APK and everything, right?
Oh yeah, from Expo creates an actual React Native application. It's just that it's wrapped in the Expo wrappers. So there's certain low-level APIs that you can use to get to resources that are on the machine, as well as other libraries that Expo provides. You get those free if you start it out as a Expo init, and even when you eject, those things are still available to you. You wouldn't get that with React, the regular React-Native. Not that that's bad, because a lot of people, they have a problem with Expo. They just don't want to use it for some reason. So they would prefer to start the way that you were originally suggesting.
Great, thanks.
Very welcome. I guess what I'm saying is there's no downside to using Expo, because after you create it, you can always eject from it and still get the benefits as if you didn't start with Expo. Okay, there you go.
Is there a link for this course?
There's the course. Please contact WebAge, and I'm sure that there is a link there. But if you just email go to webagesolutions.com, or you can email getinfousa@webagesolutions.com, and yes, they have a great React Native course. Yes.
Yes, but I mean, for this recording, do we have the link?
Oh, for the recording. Sure, of course. You signed up, you provided your email address, you're going to get a link, you're going to get an email with a link to where the recording is, so you can go back and review later.
Great, thanks.
Very welcome.
Is Visual Studio Code is the best platform to program native?
Yes, this is one of those things where it's people have different opinions. But first of all, I'll say it's my favorite, absolutely my favorite. And second, I'll say that most developers use Visual Studio Code, most of them. I find occasionally people coding in Xcode. I find occasionally people coding in Android Studio, but it's almost exclusively Visual Studio Code.
Okay, thanks.
You're very welcome. And code is free. Visual Studio Code is free. It's great for the web. So
yes,
if you use it for if you use it for React, you'll probably want to use it for React Native. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? Feel free to shout them out. If not, you can disconnect, and we'll see you soon.
Goodbye, and
Okay.
thank you for this helpful webinar.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
There will
Thank you
be
very much.
another webinar. There will be another webinars about the mobile apps.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Check with WebAge Solutions.
Yeah.
And if you want to, you could send an inquiry to GetInfoUSA at WebAge Solutions asking for those, and I'm sure that they'll let you know.
Okay. Thank you. I like the webinar very much.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Thanks.